We are back with Mike and Rosie, and also I'd like to welcome Luke Harrison. There he is. Hi, Luke. So Luke is from the Ministry of Defence. He has 10 years plus experience working in environmental and sustainability roles, and at the MOD is leading initiatives on carbon accounting and reduction efforts for product systems and services. So we're going to do, as we have done for the day so far, rapid fire questions. So there's already some through, and hopefully that will spur others to add questions in as we go along. I guess just Luke, for your perspective, obviously bringing you into the loop, what's one for you, if we can start, what strategies have you employed to make the MOD more sustainable? And I guess what lessons have you learned that you would pass on to other sustainability professionals?
Sure, thank you. So at the MOD, my kind of role is focused around equipment, and we use a system called ASEM's POEMS, which is aligned to ISO 14001. So we're continuously looking at that sort of plan, do, check, act element with our equipment, and we'll look at all of the different environmental aspects and impacts. And we might also look at the design of a piece of equipment, so whether we can move to a more sustainable engine, for example, in a certain system, or it could be about upgrading a piece of equipment to extend its life rather than needing to dispose of it away as waste. And we continuously also work with all of our delivery partners as well, making sure that they're also along a similar journey in terms of their sustainability and kind of net zero aspirations as well. I suppose some of the lessons that I've learned along the way is certainly around perhaps not always talking about the environment. So I suppose specifically in the MOD, we have a certain defensive capability that we have to meet. So say, for example, we install an electric engine into a capability. Well, it has its own benefits in terms of emissions, but also it enhances the stealth capability of that piece of equipment. So it's really about talking with our customers, so the Army, Navy, and Air Force, about ensuring that their capabilities can meet the demands of defence, but also improving that sustainability and environmental protection angle as well.
I like that. Yeah, I think there's something a lot to be said for there. Maintaining that focus on capability and an appropriateness of the product, and the fact that there's environmental parts coming in through that. That's like almost like the added bonus. Fantastic. Okay, so on to questions. Top one, do you see in-house specific sustainability teams becoming redundant in the future as the sustainability becomes fully embedded into organizations? That's an interesting one. Mike, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, simple answer, no. Everybody in an organization should be financially literate, and yet you still have a CFO. Everybody should be able to lead people, but you still have a chief people officer. So there'll always be somebody there that brings it all together, leads development skills, make sure you're planning for, what is 2.0, 3.0 to sustainability, people or finance. So you'll always have that central organizing principle. It'll be a small team, but their job ultimately more and more will be the skill set to activate everybody else around them to be able to do their day job sustainably as well. So that's the key change, but there'll always be a sustainability team in the middle.
Phew, that's good news. Good news for all the sustainability professionals on the call, I'm sure. I'll come back to those. Just one, I'm just thinking, Rosie, there was one I wanted to touch on you. Is you referenced that transport sector is having the largest policy gap. If you only have one wish, because there's a whole suite of policies, but I'm kind of want to understand, if you only had one wish, or Green Alliance had only one wish of a policy to encourage people to travel and commute more sustainably, what would it be?
I'll answer for me rather than for Green Alliance, because I don't know if we'd sign off on a one wish kind of policy briefing. But I would say from my perspective, from doing the research, the one thing that I think could make the largest difference in how people feel about transport would be just maintaining those affordable bus fares, and call for quite a radical bus fare cap of £1. And I think it's hard because it doesn't answer. Perhaps actually I would make it a minimum service guarantee. So it would be just the commitment from the government over the coming years to return those routes that we've lost really after passenger levels fell post-pandemic. I think that bus travel is just such an amazing tool to kind of resolve so much of this car dependency. I think that it's affordable, it can reduce loneliness, it can give you options to access urban centres for work, it can increase job prospects. And so I think just investing in that bus service so that people don't necessarily rely on the car every time they leave the house. If they're seeing buses go at the time that they want to leave and they can afford to get on them, I think that that could make the biggest revolution style change to the way that we use transport in this country.
Buses, I'm in favour of them too. I think, we've seen an increase. We do a commuter census each year, and we've seen an increase in buses. And where buses are concerned, commuting is absolutely critical. The discretionary users of buses are the commuters. So we've got to get them out of cars onto buses. Absolutely agree. Fantastic. Right, on to the questions again. What about those aspects of sustainability that don't produce a financial incentive? How do you get board members on board with including them? I mean, I guess, Luke, have you got any examples of one where they don't produce a financial incentive?
Really interesting one. I think, I suppose, which area of sustainability we talking about? Are you talking about economic, social, or environmental, I suppose, as well? So from my perspective, from an environmental angle, I think there are certain aspects, but I think if you're truly trying to be a sustainable organization, it's all about balancing those different aspects to ensure that you take into consideration all of those. And a lot of the time as well, using an example from a materials perspective in the MOD, if we can procure a material more sustainably and closer to home, actually it does bring down the economic sort of cost as a limit with that as well. And I think as well, looking at those board members, I think also think about what your competitors are doing. Your competitors actually, you might be able to get an additional edge over potentially somebody in the market if you can demonstrate you are meeting those sort of sustainable objectives and goals. So I think it's more, it's wider than just seeing those immediate economic returns. I think there's certain other elements, certainly in terms of corporate social responsibility and those other areas actually that can bring overall benefits to the organisation that should hopefully bring your board members along on the journey as well.
Yeah, I guess there's always this balance of tangible and intangible benefits, and I guess, Mike, from your measurement of the business case, you'd be looking to kind of bring those together in that arrangement. I mean, there's lots of stuff. Obviously, if you think about well-being, and there's great linkages that can be done. There's not a financial incentive, but there's definitely a linkage there. Perhaps you become a better employer. You employ better people because you've tackled it better. Anything to add, Mike?
Yeah, a couple of bullet points. I mean, firstly, the business case we measured had a very obvious pound, shillings, and pence aspect to it. But again, as I said, we measured employee motivation, brand perception, resilience in supply chains as well, new product development. So all of these were part of the landscape of value being generated across the organisation. I've already mentioned that there were some parts of the business that just faced costs. So we tried to subsidise where we'd made huge savings across the parts of the business that were taking a pound hit to get better wood, fish and cotton to help them move forward. The other aspect I think you've also mentioned there is co-benefits. If there's one word that dominates the 21st century in our world, it is not sustainability, it's the word well-being. So well-being of the planet, of the society, of the communities, of individuals, of families. That's a much better framing of this. And again, if you think of the challenge I put in front of us in terms of a new food system, the businesses that can show that they're putting products in front of people that are good for them personally and for the planet, two sides of the same coin, win as well. And the final little tip here, I talked about 3 billion items that M&S sells every year. We asked every single part of Marks & Spencer, men's slippers, women's dresses, furniture, beers, wines and spirits, to come up with a plan A plan. So they had to integrate sustainability into their area. They choose the first 1, 2, 3 steps that they want to take, whether it's about better fish that differentiated the product from Waitrose or Sainsbury's, for example. But we gave a degree of optionality to the team so they felt not told, but part of building the business case that was relevant to them.
There's a question here around how to ensure all areas of sustainability are considered and improved without the detriment to others. I guess there's another part, unintended consequences, which is a big thing. Whenever you launch something, there's unintended consequences. How do you manage all of that? Who'd like to have a crack at that one?
Let me give an example then, because then I hope Rosie can build off it, because I think we live in a carbon tunnel. You know, I talked about all these segments of society. Most people are not as engaged with carbon as we are. Equality, safety, health, well-being are pathways into this for many parts of society. So one of the things I'm seeing in the food system now is the competition over crops between biofuels, the potential transport solution, debate and discuss, versus the increasing cost of those crops into the food system because there's more competition for them. So I think biofuels is a really good example of perverse outcomes that we could, if we don't manage it properly. Rosie, over to you.
Yeah, I would totally agree with what you're saying. I think the co-benefits are really important and really help to paint this wider picture of the future that we want to see. And that includes meeting our environmental targets. But so many of these measures also have these huge co-benefits, particularly for my policy area, which is transport. Just like you say, we're talking about cycling, wheeling and walking more. That has direct public health benefits, but also in terms of air pollution, reducing loneliness, talking to people more on your commute. These are also these kind of, previously unnoticed side effects that we see. I read recently that if you change your commute from an hour-long drive to a short walk, it increases your self-reported level of happiness by the same level as someone who's recently fallen in love. And so I think we often talk about who loses out when we think about introducing policies to get people to drive less, but I think we don't spend enough time. Obviously, there needs to be careful policy consideration. In terms of equity, we talked about rural-urban trade-off in my presentation. There are ways that we need to make sure that there's like a government baseline so that people can't lose out beyond a certain point, and they're enforced equitably so that people who lose out aren't people who are already the worst off. But I think there's just so much to gain in this transition. I think it bears remembering that too.
Is how much is well-being, well-being in all its forms, Luke, kind of discussed, considered, implemented within the MOD?
Good question. So it's not something that I personally deal with, but we do have human factors specialists who look at that kind of area. So looking at how the user might actually use a piece of equipment, or the way that somebody, obviously there's another area that looks at how people commute into our locations, etc. as well. So unfortunately, that's something that I can't give you full insights into. There are specialists that we have that do look at that kind of thing.
Yeah, I was thinking more sort of well-being from an environment perspective, how Mike was describing actually well-being in all its forms. But moving on, because we've got lots of questions. All of these new government ideas are great, but when it comes down to it, how do we encourage people to not use their car, right down to the everyday person? I mean, I think it's obviously going to be a blended approach. There's lots of things have to work in partnership, but yeah, I mean, do you want to, Rosie? You obviously your scorecard was an attempt at and a balanced approach at doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that is an ongoing conversation, right? And so the piece of research that I presented, it's an economic model, but we know from real life that we don't all walk around doing the exact kind of actions that would be predicted in an economic model. We don't always act as perfectly rational beings. There are things that are convenient, that are comfortable, that obviously it makes sense that we do more often because they're habits and because they're appealing. And so beyond this kind of thinking of like high level government interventions that encourage us to do a certain behavior, we also think about some polling and focus groups. There are some softer factors that change how we feel about the way that we move around and the kind of transport choices that we make. And also, like we talked about, so it's kind of part of that broader well-being piece. If the active travel infrastructure outside of your house feels welcoming, is lit in a nice way, you feel safe, especially for women and young people if you're walking around, and that kind of safety, how you use a space, all of these soft factors definitely also feed into the decisions that we make when we leave our house. And I think part of the project is beyond this kind of big picture car mile reduction target, is just kind of, we need to get to a point where when people are leaving their house for each journey, they just think, oh, how will I travel this time? It doesn't even necessarily mean that nobody has a car. It just means that you take the time to be like, oh, it might be nice to get the bike out, or, oh, I could actually walk this one. I think that we talk about these high level government interventions because hopefully if you do them in the right way and you implement them well, what you create is just like a framework that when you walk out your door, you think about doing something else instead. And so I suppose as a policy expert, my belief would be that if you do all of the policies right, you create the kind of environment where people think like that when they leave their house and choose to maybe not take their car.
I mean, it'd be fantastic when we live in a world where you can do that, where you can just come outside and it's like, oh, I'll decide which one I want. I guess right now there is a bit more thinking that needs to be done. And I think that's in the sustainability theme. You know, people have to be quite considered right now, I guess. And that is a bit of a journey. So there is a question there about leadership qualities, because I'm thinking about the journey that we need to take people on. You know, kind of what are the leadership qualities or approaches that really are essential for fostering a culture of sustainability? What have you learned, Luke, from being within the MOD, and then perhaps to you after, Mike?
I think it's for me about bringing people along that journey with you. I think if people have that sense of engagement, that you've gone and actually spoken to them, and actually, what are your opinions? How can we make this work for you? And they feel involved in the process. I really think that's one of the key ways that you can ensure that you can bring your organization along that journey. And that's certainly something that that we've seen in terms of from the equipment angle as well, is that actually if you go and speak to and they get that opportunity to speak up, actually they bring ideas to the forefront that the environmental professionals haven't even thought of, and then actually it creates even wider discussion. So certainly that would be my one of my big lessons there. Over to you, Mike. Thanks.
Yeah, just 3 bullet points. I mean, the first is literacy. I've seen so many chief execs wheeled out onto a stage in front of the great and the good to read out a script about sustainability written by the chief sustainability officer. It's wooden, it's stilted, they've no idea what they're saying. They've got to understand to have credibility internally and externally. The second is relevance. We've already talked about it a lot. And this is framing this journey in terms of this is creating value for our organisation. This is not just about saving the planet in 20, 30 years' time. We're a fundamentally better organisation because we're doing this. And the third thing is consistency. We're all used to businesses, you know, there are moments in time there's a big flash in the pan, launch of a new product, a new service, a new excitement, a new building. Brilliant. And then it's forgotten within 2 or 3 days in the hurly-burly of everything else. This is about a 5, 10, 15, 20-year journey that just needs to be consistently part of everybody's life. And if there's one sort of value of that Plan A story I told you earlier, is that Plan A has lived on and on and on through 15, 20 years, despite every other business around M&S coming up with a new plan and a different name and everything else over time. And that's confused those businesses. So they're the 3 things from me.
Thank you. A piece for me, the branding of Plan A. How important was that to the whole process? So there was this focal point. I'm just wondering to what degree, you know, sustainability being branded in other companies.
Yeah. So, and again, I've already put my hand up and said I didn't invent the name Plan A. I was very lucky to inherit it from very bright people. But actually, it was worth millions of pounds of internal and external value because we were able to link all these many disparate things together, from, you know, low carbon communities to better logistics to salt reduction to better factories and farms, all the way across the landscape of the M&S business model. It was all just Plan A. And again, I think there's a lot we can learn from the digital world where, you know, frankly, men of my age in the past were sort of like plodding away, assuming that a kid downstairs would sort the computer stuff out and I could just carry on in a 20th century kind of way. I've had to become digitally literate. Businesses have transformed around digital literacy so everybody can do it. We need to do the same with sustainability.
Fantastic. A policy, and I think this is interesting actually, because you talk about the fact that this is 5, 10, 15 years. You've got to have a plan and you've got to stick to the plan. So there's an interesting one here. How integral is a good hybrid working policy in terms of becoming a more sustainable workplace? I mean, you referenced working from home, Rosie, as kind of part of the balance. I guess, you know, it can't, where working policy is concerned, it can't be something today and then something different tomorrow. We've got to be thinking, you know, what is going to be the right model going forward for an organization, and reflecting on the fact that every organization is different, is unique. Where are you sort of leaning towards on sort of working policies, Rosie?
Me.
Yes.
Sorry.
I'm coming to you first.
Yes, that's really interesting. I've actually read some mixed things about, so obviously from this piece of research, we were talking about car mile reductions, and clearly, commuting in a zero carbon way, or not commuting at all saves those miles that would otherwise be travelled by private car. However, I think if you have everybody working from home all the time, using all of their separate kind of energy needs in their own homes, you can sometimes have a bit of a carbon additional effect. And so I think it is something that really needs to have a long-term strategy. I think we're really going to need to grapple with that across different workplaces over the coming years. So I do think it's something that we need to have a serious plan for, because it's not necessarily clear what the carbon implications of all work from home or all in the office will be.
Yeah, certainly seeing of late some companies are wanting to see employees in the office more. We're seeing, again, from our commuter census, working from home at its lowest level this year. It's not to say it's here to stay in some form, but I think from collaboration perspective, I think it's for the right purpose as well. I mean, obviously, a retailer, you need people there. And just quickly, Luke, I mean, from your perspective on working policy, where are the MOD in terms of central roles? I mean, lots of people, they're working from a boat, they're working from the sea, totally different places.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is around, we do a lot of hybrid working, and I think Mike touched on the digital age there, and so instead of having to go and see some of these pieces of equipment, you've got it there on a computer screen, or you're using maybe virtual reality goggles and you can see it there in front of you. So there's not always this necessity to actually need to go and see a massive piece of equipment to reduce that. So I think talking about commuting and that kind of thing, I think the digital age will also play a big impact on that.
Fantastic. I've got to move on. We've run out of time. Thank you so much for your contributions.